Well, welcome and Happy New Year. This is our first CWR Live of the season, and we are really happy to see your faces and get back into our flow after a very hearty couple of weeks being with family and celebrating the turn into the new year. So today we have Mark Borax, who's going to be speaking about 2020 and all of the foundational changes it offers. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mr. Mark.
Thank you, Marcella, and welcome everybody. Welcome everybody live, everybody by recording, to the Cosmic Weather Report for Tuesday, January 7th, 2020, year of sweeping foundational change. And this is what we need, though it's not necessarily what we're ready for, but some part of us is. So part of the work of meeting the sweeping foundational changes of this year has to do with learning the art of dropping down in to inhabit the core part of you that knows how to make it through all of this stuff. Because your normal socialized human consciousness is fast becoming obsolete. And the art of transformation is the art of our time. The mandate is change or die. And changing involves dying as well. So it's change and die, and then change again. And what that means is that if you get caught in the view from the surface this year, the woe is me circuits of the amoral mainstream media, the amoral mainstream media has become a ravenous, devouring beast that needs to be fed for every news cycle. It doesn't care what it says. It has no interest in the content. It only exists to fulfill advertisers. And so that devouring media beast is going to present all kinds of views from the surface consciousness of our time. And each of the views that gets trumped up by the mainstream media has to be assessed for what percentage of truth and falsehood is in it, because it varies. It varies greatly. Some of the things coming out of the New York Times are largely true. A few things that come out of the New York Times might even sometimes be 100% true, though it's highly doubtful. Some of the things that come out of the New York Times are half false. Some of the things that come out of the New York Times are about 90% false. And once in a blue moon, something entirely false comes out of the New York Times. So with such a wide variety of truth and falsehood being trumped up by the mainstream media in this coming year, it behooves you to gain the art of dropping down in to inhabit the core living essence of your soul. The part of you that was here before you were here. The part of you that's been in other bodies, in other lifetimes, and came back again in order to bring your own creative force out into the world. This year is the year of sweeping foundational change. It's not just sweeping, it's not just foundational, it's sweeping and foundational. What does that mean? It means that the basis for the life that you're living will not be the same when we come out the other side a year from now. There's many reasons why this is so. The main reason is because we need it to be so. The old world is dying all around us. Its paradigms, its stories, its delusions are obsolete and strangling the living future. It takes an extra oomph right now to believe that there is a bright future for the human species. That's the heroism of our time. That's the personal heroism. You become a hero once you believe utterly that there is a bright future for the human species. Whatever it takes for you to claim that belief is so worth doing. Because lacking that, the deluge of destructive, disheartening news that's going to bombard you over the course of the next 12 months will wipe out your part to play in the role of bringing on the bright future, because we all have a part. You are important wherever you are. I know there's people watching this broadcast from Istanbul and China and Russia and New Jersey and Saudi Arabia and Florida and every place else. And each of you has a role to play in bringing on the bright future. And the first step in playing that role is to believe in it. It's a heroic act. It is the heroic act of our time, because the evidence from mainstream press, from the minds of your coworkers and your family, the stories that are trumped about, the stories that are bounced around the internet, bounced around social media, bounced around the consciousness of our time, are old, destructive, obsolete stories that need to be replaced. They need to be replaced with stories of the soul. Taken from the viewpoint of the soul, this is more the end of everything that never worked right in the first place than it is the end of something valuable and worth preserving. Taken from the viewpoint of the soul deep inside you, the soul of the world, the soul of the species, this is more, this karmic theater drama that's going to unfold within the next year is more about the death of what never worked right in the first place than it is about the end of all good things. Though it's inevitable that some good things will go, some good things will end, because we're not going to be in the same foundational relationship with existence by the end of this year as we are now. The power of the coming year is the power to compel your deepest inner truth to come out from hiding. The modern condition that socializes people into feeding the war machine, the propaganda machine, the lies, the bullshit, the delusion machine, is by making you think that you cannot live your deepest essential truth. That's the original lie that all lies flow from. The lie is that you cannot be the miracle that you are, the miracle of love, that you cannot live your greatest, freest creative existence, and that's a lie. It's the original conditioning lie that inserts itself into parents who insert it into children. It gets inserted into teachers. It gets inserted into politicians like crazy. And negative forces of our time use that lie to manipulate you. So there is an act of liberation that has to do with you waking up to the idea that you can live your deepest truth, that you can be your outrageously eclectic, eccentric, erratic, erotic, amazing self. The blend of cosmic perfection and human strangeness that you are is exactly what the universe needs at this time and nothing else. That's what turns around the main lie of our time. Because if you create a world of people who start believing that they can be who they really are, that they are here to be who you are, you owe this world nothing except your truth. You owe society nothing except your truth. You owe your lover and your mother and your father and your husband and your children and your teachers and your cats and your animals and the trees and the oceans and the rivers and Donald Trump, nothing except your truth. You are here to bring the deep core essence, the energy vibration, the cosmic love, the inner creative blessing of your unique existence. That's why you're here. That's why your soul arrived. That's what you're doing. When we approach a year of sweeping foundational change, that needs to be the new foundation. That needs to be when the earth quakes under your feet, like it did for so many of us in California many times. When the earth quakes under your feet and the very foundations you walk upon become dubious and untrustworthy, you need to replace them with a foundation of being true to yourself, being the love you are, claiming your truth, owning your truth, knowing the deeper need for you to waste no more time and discover what makes you feel good from root to crown, what wakens the cell fire in your body, what makes you the love you are, what gives you inspiration, what gives you wholeness. As the foundations of this coming year shake and crumble and deteriorate, as they're already starting to do, that has to be the new foundation, a foundation of soul, a foundation of truth. It's not always big and dramatic. It's not always hyped up. It's not always going to affect the huge outcome of nations, but it doesn't need to. It only needs to be your truth. It might be small. It might be humble. It might be modest. It might be shaky. It might be vulnerable. Thank God, I hope it's vulnerable. I hope the numbness wears off. I hope we all become vulnerable. I hope we all feel the intensity of our time, because it is only by feeling the intense changes of our time that we stimulate the soul inside us to come out wherever you are, rather than the mask, rather than the costume, rather than the compromises, the compromised existence. So whether your truth is big and melodramatic and sweeping, or small and humble and vulnerable, it just needs to be your truth. And that has to be the foundation. That cannot be the thing that sometimes happens after you deal with everything else in your life. No, it has to be now. You have to be the love you are now. You have to be the truth you are now. You have to do that with your sexuality and your family and your work and your politics and your career and your neighborhood, and most of all, with yourself. You have to sit down and look into your core and give it the absolute authority to take over and become the new ground you stand upon. It's an act of devotional willpower between self and self, between self and God, between self and goddess, between self and world. That is the only thing that is going to break the spell of the old sick paradigms, the old toxic stories, the part of the human species that is suicidal and out to destroy not only itself, but take everything with it. We could call it the Trump factor, though he's not the only one. The only thing that's going to combat the suicidal, old, obsolete paradigms, the stories that worm themselves inside your head, is a heroic act of daring yourself to actually believe and know and claim that you are made of love, you are made of starlight, you are made of magic, you are made of flesh and blood, you are made of karma, and you are made of grace. And that deep foundational knowing has to become not an idea of your brain, but a living cellular reality. Every part of your body, your chakras, your aura, your past lives, your relationship, the neural pathways that stream through your body from your brain to your heart and your hands have to become filled with the knowing that there is something absolutely right about you on the deepest of all levels. And the corollary idea that there is something absolutely right about the human species on the deepest of all levels. We cannot blame this on the human species as if we were a plague on the earth and nature would be better off without us. No, it is the false version of the human species that we have to murder. We have to commit an assassination of the false self. Humanity has something deeply right if you go down deep enough. You have something deeply right if you go down deep enough. Everybody has something deeply right if you go down deep enough, but some people are so twisted that you're never going to get there. But you cannot stop holding that picture, that foundational picture that there is something deeply, not only right, but blessed. There is something sacred. There is something beautiful. There is something rare. There is something miraculous inside you and inside all humanity. That's the new foundation. That's the depth. That's the core. That's the ground. That's what needs to be replacing the lies of the surface mind, of collective consciousness, of a corrupt mainstream media, of a damaged political system. In my country, the Democrats are equally damaged as the Republicans. It just doesn't look that way. This is all damage. It's all war machine. It's all bought. When the foundations shake, and we're 5 days away from the first tremors of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. We're 5 days away from the planet of structure and form, Saturn, combining with the god of hell, Pluto, in the sign of social organization, Capricorn. That starts a year of the most extraordinary Capricornian changes that of our lifetime. Because after the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, there's 3 Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions in April, June, and November. And Jupiter, planet of the bright living future, coming together with the god of hell in the sign of social power, is going to shake up the way power's being used all over. And boy, does that need to get shaken up. We have to learn the difference between true and false power. We have to learn the difference between authentic and inauthentic delusional power. The main difference is that false power does nothing but take, and true power gives. The part of you that has so much to give, so much more than you ever even dream. You are plugged into a universal love channel. You were sponsored by the cosmos. The cosmos plucked your spirit out of the infinite and tossed it into the earth existence. But you're still cosmic. But you're still powered by love. You're running on ULP, ultimate love power. We're all running on ULP. ULP, ULP, ULP. We have to switch over from carbonized fossil fuels to ULP. unlimited love power. When the shit hits the fan through the New York Times and politics and assassinations of generals and wars with countries, when the shit hits the fan, you need to replace the old foundations with unlimited love power. Along with the great Capricornian changes of our time, which are bringing on an entire change in the way we use power, is that 2020 is numerologically a 4 year, which is the most rigorous of all the numbers because it's foundational. It's about structure and form. The structure and form of your love, your life, your marriage, your existence, your days, your nights, the structure and form of the main paradigm of how you see things, the structure and form of what you're here for is all being bombarded by rays of growth and change this year. And it's only going to amplify between now and the great winter solstice conjunction of 2020. On December 21st of this year, Jupiter and Saturn come together in a conjunction astrologers call the Great Conjunction, because the past meets the future on that day. Also, there's an eclipse on that day. It's the all-powerful winter solstice, and the great conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn is in the 1st degree of Aquarius. This is intended to bring on the next phase of the Aquarian age. The age of Aquarius is a 2173-year-long period. It's not going to happen all at once overnight. Even though back in the 60s we sang about entering the age of Aquarius, we're still entering it. Different parts of the world population enter that age at different times. What happens here in the early stages of the age of Aquarius is that we are summoned to wake up to how unawake we are. That's what's going on. Because the world population en masse cannot awake until it realizes how asleep it is. That's what's happening now. It doesn't always look that way. But what's going on under the way things look is the greatest wake-up call in our time, maybe in all of history. The greatest wake-up call. Aquarius means that the great consciousness sleeping in the masses awakens. We're in the earliest stages of that awakening, and it's rough. If you have ever been around someone, if you've ever had a lover who's going through their tremendous change of consciousness at a certain point in their life, you know that it's not that easy to be around somebody whose consciousness is waking up. It's not that easy to be around somebody who's quitting cigarette smoking after 40 years. Not that easy to be around somebody who's stepping out of addictions, whose consciousness is waking up. That's what's going on with the world body. That's what's going on with the organism of the human species. The drugs are wearing off. The addiction is wearing off. The consciousness is waking up, and it is ragged. Because one of the first things that happens when you awaken is you become inundated by how unawake you are and how unawake everyone is. We have to live through this stage. You see, this started to happen one time before that's in some of the people's lives now who are on this call, that's in our living memory. This started to happen in the 1960s, when the great revolution in consciousness surged from San Francisco and Berlin and New York City and Paris and London, all around the world. a huge tsunami of awakening surged through the world. And one of the main results of it was an intense conservative backlash. The tsunami of progressive evolution created an undertow of intense recalcitrance. We've been living in the undertow of the 60s ever since. That awakening of mass consciousness scared the shit out of repressive conservative forces all over the world, and they clamped down tight. And it's only now that that clampdown is starting to release as a new surge of awakening spreads throughout the ranks. So remember, in the early days of Aquarius, let's say from the 1960s, through probably the 2060s, there's a good 100 years of the early days of Aquarius here. We're still in the earliest days of a 2173-year period. It doesn't look like we're all one, we're all awake. Mass consciousness, yay, we're waking up. It looks like, holy fuck, Donald Trump. And that is not belying the truth of the predictions of Aquarius, because we cannot wake up until all over the world we see the horrors of what our unawakeness has created, the devastation. Which is why some people theorize that Trump would have been better than Hillary. And it's an interesting philosophical point. But I'm not going to go into that sidetrack right now. What I'm going to go into is the change that's also going to be brought about on January 25th, when the boar turns around and gives the year over to the rat. Pig to rat. January 25th, when the Oriental animal year changes. Because we have a few weeks left of the boar. And the boar is the animal that charges into life to fulfill its ravenous desire. We have a few weeks left of that. A year ago, around the time we entered the boar year, and I saw this is about charging ahead into ravenous desire, I began my new book on the revising the 12 signs of the zodiac. I'm deep into the writing of it now, a year later. And there's still a few weeks left of that charging wild pig energy to go after what you desire. But on January 25th, the rat takes over. Now, the boar charges through things, the rat gets down into things. The rat is the most ingenious of the Chinese animals. Clever, ingenious, getting down into things, never pausing, doing at least 3 things at once. And as that energy comes in and takes over from the boar, there's a summons to get clever about your life in terms of tapping your innate genius, because everybody has one. Everybody has a stream of consciousness, maybe narrow, maybe broader, maybe deep, maybe shallower, but everybody has a stream of genius. The oddball way that you see things, that nobody else sees things that way. And ironically, this is often the part of yourself that you've thought is the worst part of you, because it's made so much trouble in jobs and relationships. I can't tell you how many jobs I was fired from between age 16 and, I don't know, 33. I was like, I always had the talk, Mark, you're a great guy and we're going to have to let you go. Sorry, buddy. And it wasn't until I got a job managing, editing Comics Interview magazine in the comic book industry that I found a boss who was paying me to be unique and creative and eccentric and oddball and to come up with ideas to help his magazine that no one else would have ever thought of. And at that moment, I realized, oh shit, this isn't the worst part of me. This is the best part of me. Thank God I got fired from all those other jobs and I can start doing something creative. And those years that I worked in the comic book business, first managing Editing Comics Interview, and then as an agent who helped represent comics creators, gave me the confidence to launch my astrology career in 1987, when I stood up in the San Francisco Bay Area and said, who am I to think I could be an astrologer with all these hundreds of other astrologers around here? I had confidence because I had spent a few years getting paid to be unique. That part of you that can't fit in with the program, that part of you that your earlier lovers said is way too intense, that part of you that you've never known what to do with is your greatest part. It is your genius. It is, thank God there's a part of you that can't be normal. Thank God there's a part of you that kept you out of the trance of normalcy, which turns out to be a prison. But the prison is busting apart because there is a year of sweeping foundational change upon us. And the more that you use the rats getting into things, clever ingenuity, to launch your genius towards some foundational restructuring of your own existence, the more you'll be lining up with the powers of this year. Anybody have any questions? And we usually offer this to the main sign of the thing first. So let's see if there's any Capricorns who have questions. But let's also see if there's anybody who has any questions.
And just feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you don't know how to do that, down at the bottom of your screen, towards the left-hand side, there's a mute and unmute. Oh, and if you're one of our attendees, if you raise your hand, I can allow you to be able to ask your question, but you do have to raise your hand, which is another function down at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming that you mean metaphorically raise their hand through the technology more than actually lifting their hand?
Yeah, sorry, there's a click that says raise your hand. While people may be composing a question or a thought, I just want to go back to the point that you made around we owe the world nothing but our truth. And it was so striking for me to hear you say that, because it really brought back a very, very strong memory I had when I was working deeply ceremonially, where it just became so clear that actually anything but that does fall away. Like, it is not stable. Anything, because it's when you said it, I'll just say it sounded so dramatic, right? Because the part of me that is still so tied to different social conditioning, that has all these expectations of what I'm supposed to do or who I'm supposed to be to keep things in order. It's such a juxtaposition to the truth that I got in my ceremonial practices, where it really became so clear that, oh my God, anything that isn't true is going to fall away. And at that time, I actually was in a marriage and a life that wasn't actually my truth. And it was very scary. It was very scary to actually feel like, oh God, I better actually get really clear and down into the truth that I can feel is more real than the life that I'm living, because I just could tell. It was like, holy shit, anything that's not real falls away. And when you were expressing that and looking at all these conjunctions happening this year, it really does feel so powerful and like such great direction to give at this point in the journey, because then even if we're not prepared for something to fall away, at least we can remember that we can align with the truth that's inside of us to help us reorient ourselves as things fall away, whether we're ready or not.
Yes. Yeah. And just like a crisis, if you were driving your car through an ice storm and 20 cars collided all together, when you rolled out of the car with some blood on your nose, you wouldn't stop to ask the person lying on the ground gasping next to you if they were a Republican or a Democrat. That's what's happening. There is a crisis of foundational importance here that transcends political affiliations, sexual affiliations, cultural affiliations. Our world is in peril. Our future is at risk. You're being summoned to play a part in that. And it takes the kind of girding of your inner love nature that Marcella's giving witness to. When I was 18 years old, I got a job driving school buses in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I hit an ice storm at an intersection of about 7 different roads, spun around in the bus, cars crashed into each other. I tumbled out of the bus and nobody knew what to do. And the chaos was building. And I said, I have to be the one in charge here. Nobody's in charge. I said, okay, you team up with this person. We're going to lift this guy's car up and move it over there. You back out there. You go out to that perimeter, have people stop for a while. Somehow, some part of me that had never done this before, as this 18-year-old long-haired hippie bus driver kid, took over, and all these businessmen and people did what I told them to. Why? Because I acted like I knew I was in charge. Well, thank God I had that chutzpah as an 18-year-old kid in Bridgeport, because it unglued the traffic jam and we all moved on. Now I'm doing the same thing for the whole damn world. And so we all have to claim that power where it's a trauma of a proportion that nothing less than your truth will get you through it.
Yeah, and it actually isn't you pretending like you know what you're doing in order to have a feeling of power and control. Actually, it's just that your connection to your truth has you trust yourself enough to say, this is not a time for paralysis, folks. We actually need to take some action right now in order to create the best possible outcome that can be created right now. So I just appreciate that anchoring, because if all of us can take our places and feel that truth that we all have, that we all may not trust because we've had so many layers of conditioning that goes on top of it to tell us that we are bad or wrong, or it's not okay to be who we are, that it just takes some digging to get back to that place where we trust that what Spirit has given us is perfection and can show up with everything we have it in us to be in a rightful way. And that's partly what reorients the whole world back into having the solidity that it needs and the power that it needs to slough off the illusions that right now so many of us are feeding with our consciousness, because we're still getting back to that place of truth that allows the sort of traffic director person to come through with the kind of authority that allows things to actually create a much better order.
Yes. Yeah. Capricorn search for authentic power is not power over anyone. It's the power to align with your truth. A human being who totally aligns with every iota of your body with your truth is unstoppable. Unstoppable. This is not about power over. It's about the power to inhabit the living core, radiant, magical essence of your soul. Any people lighting up the circuits, Marcella?
Yeah. Let me just pop over here to the attendees. So I don't have any hands up over there. And I also just want to open it up so that folks know it's not just if you're born under the sign of Capricorn, but we would welcome anyone to make a comment or ask a question.
Yeah, only if you're a Democrat.
You know, something else also just popped into my mind, Mark, about what you've been talking about that feels really pertinent, which is that my understanding of what's also happening at this time is that there's a way that our inner world is maybe beginning to transition more to the outer world, that there's been this sense of the outer world being true and our inner worlds being false, and that somehow through this rite of passage that we're going through in this year, that that's also part of how things are getting restructured, that the internal and external relationship is actually being realigned in some different way. And I'm curious if you could, if you have anything to say about that.
That's part of the transformation to Aquarius, is that what was way out on the edges and the fringes comes into the center, and what was on the outside comes into the inside, and what was on the inside comes to the outside. So the transformation here is a radical shift in realizing that the way that you change the world is by changing yourself in a way that changes the world. You don't have to go out to the world to meet the world on its own level to change it. This is often the damage of politics and rabid environmentalism and things like that, is you start out with this great idea and then you go to where the change needs to take place without first shamanically initiating yourself into the deeper, truer power of your soul, and you become vulnerable. You're trying to change the world before changing yourself in a way that changes the world. So Marcella's addressing the Aquarian inside out, outside in version. You know, it's almost biblical. He who was first will be last, and she who was small will be giant, and he who was Republican will be astrologer. And you know, it has that kind of a biblical ring to it.
Okay, we have a question. So I'm unmuting Christiane.
Hi.
Hey, Mark and Marcella, thank you so much. It's more this expression of gratitude and saying thank you for the confirmations, because I know that I signed on the dotted line to come here. I know that. So I love that you said, you know, I really dig that you said Cosmos is sponsoring us, right? To be our unlimited self. And just so grateful for those reminders, because as for myself, I'm going deeper into this spiral of understanding who I am and tapping into that love and tapping more into that love power. I'm going inward, and I tend to isolate, and then I'll go back out. This is expansion and contraction, expansion, you know, contraction, because of knowing that it's like, no, that's not cool. What's going on out there? What's cool is right here going in. So that confirmation from you and Marcella is so beautiful, and I thank you.
Well, you are
really,
quite welcome.
Say thank you. I know Hawaii.
You're just so welcome, and I love what you said about realizing you signed on the dotted line to come here, which is a great reminder that everyone who's now alive agreed beforehand to be here for the changing of the guard. This is the make or break it period of humanity on planet Earth. What happens in the next 10 to 20 to 50 years will determine whether humanity has a future on this planet or not. And that means everyone who's alive here, your soul previewed this time. It was the important draw. It was the need for you to temporarily abandon your home in oneness and once again take up a home in diversity. When you agreed to leave spirit, you left indivisibility for the wacky world of matter. And in this wacky world of matter, we need you to be you. And it's good to remember that you did sign on the dotted line. And we're so glad you did.
Yeah, thank you for that, Christiana. And so good to see you. So I have another question.
Aloha.
Aloha. This is from one of our attendees, and they wrote in, my question is, what is recommended to know truth if you have multiple selves? also it's a bit tricky sometimes to discern, as I sometimes feel caught in my multidimensionality and taking in my surroundings.
Okay, so what was the first phrasing of that? Just do the first part.
Yeah. What is recommended to know truth if you have multiple selves?
Okay, what is recommended to know truth if you have multiple selves? This is good because this gives me a chance to go back and address something Christiana brought into this, which is the contraction and the expansion. The contraction and the expansion, the contraction and the expansion. We all have multiple selves. We're all made up of subselves and channels. You're made up of your past lives. You're made up of your previous lovers. They each gave a part to you. You have some of your parents in you and your ancestry. You have some future selves, spiritual beings. You're composed of plant consciousness, animal consciousness, earth. Earth is a living entity. The cosmos is a living entity. Out of all those cells, in order to know which is the truth, when you're made up of multiple cells, you have to use the pressures of your current existence as an initiation. The great pressures of our time have tremendous initiatory value. What they're initiating you into is becoming more of who you are. How do you know when that's happening? It's because when you go into the expanded state, the one where you're in love and oneness and bliss and ecstasy, like you're, in a love fest on the West Coast or at Harbin Hot Springs soaking in the water, or any of the other images that work for you when you expand, the best side of an ayahuasca medicine journey or an acid trip, the best side of dance, art, lovemaking, togetherness. When you expand into the, it's so great to be alive and I'm one with all things version, that's to renew your cosmic origins. So when the inevitable contraction follows, you bring more of them down into the contracted state with you, rather than resent the contracted state for yanking you out of the expanded state. So learning the truth of the different multiple parts of you and the different subcells involves knowing that some parts of you are more set up to deal with and to decipher the codes of the contracted state. I came from a 1950s male Jewish New York City background. I have a lot of karmically rigorous, contracted, tough guy personas I had to come up with to get by, to make it through that New York upbringing, and then the following Connecticut. I moved to Connecticut when I was 9, and I was the only Jewish kid in a neighborhood of tough Italians and Irishmen whose parents worked for the mafia. And I was like a fish out of water. I needed a lot of armoring. I needed to be clever. I needed to find ways to survive. And those parts of me are not completely false and bogus and need to be gotten rid of. They have their own truth. Thank God I have a part of me that is streetwise. I can handle myself, and so when you're talking about which of the multiple parts of your own nature, how do you know which truth to go with? You go with all of them, but you just have to adjust the magnitude of some of them to be in proper proportion to the whole of you. It just wouldn't work for me to go ranting through Putney, Vermont as my asshole New York self, like when you cut me off in traffic. Or, when this guy who was pissed off at me in a gas station parking lot started backing his car into my 9-year-old son to teach me a lesson, I punched him through his fucking window. Thank God I have a New York part of me that can punch a fucking guy in the head when he's acting as if he wants to run over my kid. I'm not going to start counseling him and reading his birth chart at that moment. So, yeah, there might have been other ways to handle that, but my kid was threatened and I reverted to New York. Don't mess with my kids if you don't want to bring the New York in me out. And so is that my whole truth? Is it that was the only truth I had at that moment? No, I realized I was kind of being an asshole. That's why I didn't hit him that hard. And he knew that I didn't hit him that hard because he just kept backing up instead of making anything further of it. He knew it. And so the parts of you that have different various truths all get to have their truth, but you have to exercise inner strength to learn which one you want to run the show and what magnitude to adjust those different parts to. And that's how to deal with the contractions and the expansions. Any other pipeline comments, Marcella?
There was one more question, but it had so much astrology in it, and I know that's not necessarily your preference for these.
You mean a personal chart? You mean somebody's own personal chart? Yeah. I don't like to spend a lot of time with the group on somebody's personal chart because it's not as universal. So I usually save those questions for come see me and get a reading or get one from Marcella. Any other, there was some, I thought, Carola, I know, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, but it looks like you have something to say. Can you unmute yourself or should we unmute you?
Well, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for being able to join in. I live in the Netherlands. We don't know each other yet, but maybe we do. Two things I like to share, and it's a question as well. This red here, the quality of the red, like you have a lot of red in you, I think. But in the Netherlands, there is a boy story, Siske de Rat. That means it's a street guy, a little boy who survives everything and is very joyful. It's not negative, but creative and very independent and very wild and rebellious. So I hope that people get lots of reds as images to take on to become more red-like this coming year. I thank you for that. And then this truth business. For me, it's a big question. Sometimes I don't know, I get so confused of what I take in, and I have to sort out what then is my own truth. So the only way I can solve that is like standing. I'll stand up, like standing in a tree and become silent and put Emet, the Jewish Emet, the Aleph, the Mem, the Tav, all the letters of the Aleph Beit, and listen, what truth is coming in this silence and in this centering. And that to me is a powerful practice, which I learned from my Hasidic teachers, to stand in your own truth and to find a way to do that like a tree. So that's not astrology. Maybe I have two. My son is 2 degrees in Virgo, so I need that embodiment.
Very powerful. Very, very powerful, and a great reminder to stand in the truth of your silence, to stand in the depth of your truth. That's good for everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the Netherlands rat story.
Yes.
Any other final things before we sign off for today?
Sarah's been trying to say something for a little while.
Oh, Sarah.
I have a little something to add, which is seems very relevant to all of the inside, the outside, the genius, all these things. The way we hold the idea of our own wounding, and that, sometimes I feel that people hesitate because they feel like I'm not healed enough to get out there and really be the truth that I am, the love that I am. And I just saw this documentary about Eric Clapton in 12 bars. And it was such a poignant example of that. Our deepest wound, you know, he was deserted when he was a little kid, and by his mother, and he was raised by his grandparents, and then told the story later that the person he thought was his sister was actually his mother, and he felt totally betrayed by everybody. And he took all that pain and he put it into music. He put it into becoming one of the greatest all-time guitarists. But it was his pain. And he turned it into medicine, not only for himself, but for the whole entire world, and for generations it will be. And so that I think there's an intricate connection between the wound that becomes our medicine, that reveals our genius.
Yeah.
We might not see it in another way, but the thing that we feel protective of or shameful of is actually the thing that presents to us our genius. And if we can hold it that way, we can know that is what there is to vulnerably bring to the world.
Absolutely.
However we have coped with our deepest pain created our genius, and that's a good thing.
Yes. Yes, very wise words, very true words. Thank you, Sarah. The pain is the genius. The wound is the cure. That part of you that is broken lets in the light. And boy, we need a lot of light this year, the year of sweeping foundational change. Thank you, everybody, for joining Marcella and I and the College of Visionaries and Wizards today. Any of you who are interested in joining our chart study class, we're taking new recruits in for our 3-year journey. And I'm sending you New Year's blessings for realness to come in and save the day. Thank you. This is Soul Level Astrologer Mark Borax with the Cosmic Weather Report for Tuesday, January 7th, 2020, the year of sweeping foundational change. Until we meet again, may your karma turn to grace.
Thanks. Goodbye. So good to see you.
Thank you.
Bye. Aloha.
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 Bye. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.